Baby steps.
Baby steps. Baby steps. All right. Just got to signal that we're live. Good morning, St. John's and other viewers. This is Between Two Services, one of our digital ministries here in the parish. I'm joined this morning by Sharon Oler. And Sharon, welcome back. The last time you were on, we were just talking about this. We were filming across the hall. We didn't have studio lights. We're making some progress.
We are indeed making progress.
And hopefully when this ministry resumes in the fall, we'll be even more kind of high-tech and official. But this morning, we really wanted to talk about your work with the tornado recovery in Western Kentucky. I've been very interested to hear about this. I mean, because this was something like you were really passionate about, and you're like, oh, I'm just going to get in the truck, I'm just going to drive out, I'm just going to help out. So tell us the story.
Fortunately, I've been married nearly 37 years to a man who understands instant crazy.
Okay.
I was, I guess, first touched by this back in December when the event happened. I was playing in the pit orchestra for Woodford Theater and watching the radar as this storm moved its way up from West Kentucky. And for several weeks, I felt compelled to do something, but really didn't have a direction of what I wanted to do. And by mid-January, I had started to formulate a plan. And for me, I've always been kind of a techie, computer, social media person. And so I delved into some social media, first of all, to find out who I could contact in that area to be the most effective help possible.
Right.
And the connections began to come together. I got phone calls from emergency management coordinators who could tell me, this is what these are our immediate needs. And at that time, they were looking at moving individuals into travel trailers, so a lot of small household items, and they needed individuals to staff a distribution center.
Yeah.
I had never visited Mayfield. I had been into that area of the state in years prior for various reasons, but had never been to Mayfield. Mayfield mirrors Versailles very much. The population of Mayfield is within a couple of hundred of our own town. So I was particularly touched by that. So back to my social media explorations, once I had in mind a list of what they needed, then it became a determination of how do I, as a volunteer, make the minimal footprint.
Right.
And I could do that because I could repurpose a vehicle that I use in my hobbies. I have a living quarters or a camper like horse trailer, a truck to pull it with, a generator. And so I knew immediately that would be the best way for me to travel. Being a female traveling alone, I enlisted the help of a friend who could meet me from Evansville, Indiana. She was newly retired, and she needed an activity to launch her new career as a retiree. So she met me. And her name is Kat Drawn from Evansville. Kat met me. We stayed in a Walmart parking lot. We could return to our home base every night after working shifts in the distribution center. And the other thing that I figured is if I was taking 54 feet of trailer down with me, I could pack it with needed supplies.
Yeah.
So again, enter social media, and on a personal level, I notified my friends of my plans to make the trip. I notified the community of my plans to make the trip, and so many individuals stepped up. and got me the items that were requested.
Right.
Interestingly enough, one of the most requested items was a toaster.
Interesting.
Everybody wanted that return to normal, wake up in the morning and have coffee and toast. And so I had a lady who said, I think I have purchased every toaster in Versailles.
There you go.
And she brought them out to the house.
Right.
And we loaded the back of the trailer up with what amounted to an industrial pallet full of household items, brand new sheets, skillets, new and used items from parishioners here at St. John's, from community members of Versailles. And literally, it bypassed inventory. They literally went onto the trailer, took the entire pallet, moved it right out onto the floor for distribution to the folks that we were helping during the 3 days I stayed down there.
That is an incredible story.
It was eye-opening. It was soul-opening. It was amazing to see the efforts of individuals from far beyond this area. There were people who had been down there for weeks, from New York, from out west. The lady who ran the laundry, there was a mobile laundry set up, and she had left the forest fire areas in November, had a couple of days at home, immediately got the call to go to Mayfield, and predicted she would be in Mayfield until May with a mobile laundry set up in a parking lot so that people could have clean clothing and bedding.
Yeah. Because all of a sudden, I mean, there's no infrastructure.
There is absolutely no infrastructure.
And everyone who had washer and dryer at home there.
Yeah. Now, all these people who are now residing in campgrounds have
Right.
no laundry facility.
Exactly. Well, what was it like when you kind of drove through this community and realizing that it's sort of like, but for the grace of God, I mean, this could have been Versailles, there's that kind of tangible connection, as you said, it mirrors Versailles. What was it like when you kind of saw the destruction?
I started seeing the destruction an hour away from my destination. It was sort of like, here's a warm up to your reality, and it began at Dawson Springs as I made the trip down the West Kentucky Parkway. As I got off in that community, the Mayfield is circled by a bypass, much like New Circle Road in Lexington. And at the point where I exited the interstate, it literally looked like the world's largest leaf blower had completely annihilated everything.
Yeah.
There was nothing left but piles of debris that
Right.
people were working to get collected, and then they would have crews that would come along and clean all this up. I chose to avoid ever seeing the downtown area of Mayfield. I felt, out of respect to those folks, if I had not seen their beautiful community before the devastation, I felt like that was an invasion of their privacy. So I restricted my activities to that Beltway area so I could travel from one end of the Beltway to the other. Now, interestingly enough, because it's circular, that tornado bisected from the southwest corner of the Beltway to the northeast corner being where I got off the interstate, and the southwest corner being just adjacent to where I was staying at the Walmart. Right. And I did do the Beltway just so I could survey how long that and wide that path was through that circular bypass. And I can only imagine what the downtown area would have looked like, because it literally cut through the center of the town. Now, fortunately for them, their entire education infrastructure lies along the Beltway. Their schools were spared. Their children could go back to some semblance of normal. And most of the parents chose to drive their children in. They might have been staying in the state parks in the area, but they would bring their children into the school. So the schools were
their friends and their teachers and familiar settings. That's all. Like, I mean, I think natural disasters in general are just so disorienting that having that kind of, those touch points of stability are so crucial to people.
Precisely.
Well, I think you've touched on a lot of topics that I really want to lift up. One, I think people often misunderstand how complicated disaster recovery is, and there tends to be, I think, connected to disasters of all kinds. There tends to be like a desire to help out that often lends itself to kind of bad practices. I remember, for instance, I was an RA in the dorms in 9/11, and when 9/11 happened, and that was up for a number of reasons a life changing event for most Americans. For me, one of the things that I took out of that experience was that people started donating clothing. And actually, when you read the accounts of organizations like the Red Cross, they essentially had to then lease storage for all of these household items and clothing, which were donated and were well meaning, but like the World Trade Center was an office tower, right? Like there
Right.
was some residential housing that was destroyed in the course of that attack, but most of it was business infrastructure. So there was like this desire to, let's do a canned food drive for 9/11. Well, okay, there were actually vastly different community needs. And unfortunately, what happened was that the cost of dealing with items that were not needed drained resources, volunteer hours, professional organizations, so that like everyone who responded and was looking for something to do and then, gave used clothing or donated canned goods actually ended up not really producing any good and any good help for that their good intentions ended up sapping energy rather than making a positive contribution. So one of the things that you mentioned was you were in contact with people on the ground first, and the items that you brought you knew were needed, right? You didn't show up with just whatever people might have wanted to give. You had kind of a list. This is what I mean, who would know that like you needed toasters?
Who would know toasters are on the list? And any items that weren't on the list that were large, like I had someone want to donate a box spring and bed rails. I actually contacted my coordinator down there and said, hey, look, I have a lady who wants to donate a box spring and bed rails. Perfectly happy to bring it. Do you have a use for it?
Yeah.
Yes, I know someone who needs that now. Great.
Okay,
It's
good.
going. So that worked out really well. And I have no idea where because I've never done this before.
Right.
This is the first time I put myself in this situation. It's the first time I've had any experience like this, and I don't know where the idea came to me to say, hey, check with them first and find out what they
Right.
need, and we'll target that so that we can be the most efficient that we can be with both our time and our efforts.
Right. Because you want to be of genuine help to the disaster. And this is one of the reasons why, everyone's like, oh, Father Dana, come on. But I'm like, my advice is always 100% of the time, having been a pastor during a natural disaster, and having, lots of experience, and talking with colleagues, send money. Like if you want to send something and you're not sure what to send and you don't have a local contact on the ground who's going to tell you send toasters, send money. Right? Because that's actually what the professionals need and what they can use. The other thing that people forget in natural disasters of all kinds is that when donated items rush into a community that aren't needed, they need to be distributed and stored, which then saps resources like I talked about, in New York after 9/11. The other thing is you think about being a small business owner in a community, and your home and your business have been impacted, and then all of a sudden your community is flooded with items that perhaps you would have sold. Then you're not getting the revenue that's going to help you to restart your business. Now, some of that's just the reality, right? Like if you sold toasters before the tornado and all of a sudden your store was destroyed, you're not able to sell toasters. Obviously, they need to come down from Versailles. But that's the important reason why I think working with professional disaster relief organizations and with emergency management is so important, because one of the things that they'll prioritize is how do we support the local economy in the recovery, because a flood of goods can then make it harder for local businesses to then restart operations. So this is kind of it's really complicated. It's one of the reasons why I think the church has good organizations that work and do this work professionally. Mm-hmm. And of course, we also need volunteers like Sharon to come down and to do a specific job, not be a disaster tourist. I think that was beautiful what you said. I wasn't going to drive through downtown and see the worst of it. And then the other thing you said, which I thought was really, really commendable, was you said something about having the smallest footprint. Mm-hmm. Because that too is, it's sort of like all of a sudden, like you send goods that aren't needed, they sap energy and resources in the local community. But then if you come as a person without a thought into a place where the people who live there, that's their home, they don't have everything they need, and you're not prepared to meet your own needs. So walk us through the process of thinking, okay, how do I get down there and live as a human being for 3 days without having a big footprint?
For me, it was, again, checking and double checking with my people on the ground. Where can I stay? What's available to me at that location? I knew I had to deal with weather. My first plans for the trip, about a week out, we had some dire weather predictions that put us on the borderline for an ice storm. So I did postpone for a week, knowing that the last thing I wanted to do was get down and be stranded on the other side of the storm with bad weather here, or the flip, get down there in the ice storm and be stranded. I took food and provisions and everything necessary, fuel for my generator, so that I could be entirely self-sufficient.
Right.
I took human companionship for both safety as well as moral reasons.
Right.
I was prepared to be able to do nothing but work and come back and sleep at night.
Yeah.
As it turned out, I got down there, the particular side of town that I was in, virtually untouched. So then I had extra cash and decided I'd pump that into local economy. So, I went into the local Walmart and purchased items that I could donate. I went to local restaurants, fueled up. And that was another big issue, is I had no idea what their situation was with diesel fuel. So I can carry enough fuel in my rig to run about 800 miles.
Okay.
And so I was prepared. I could make the trip down and back. But it was well planned out. I had my husband go over all my equipment to make sure that everything was running flawlessly before I hit the road.
So that you wouldn't go from being someone who was there to help to being someone who was there in need of help.
Correct. I really had in mind the tunnel vision of, I wanted to get there, I wanted to work and contribute, and I wanted to leave no trace, basically. And it worked out beautifully.
Well, I think I love one of the other things that you say. I'm being like, do like what Sharon did, right? This is like, because one of the things is you talked about delaying the trip a week because of the weather. And that's something with disasters that I feel like, because the way our news cycle works, it's like, here's a disaster, it gets all the attention, and then 5 days later, it's like, oh, it's over, it's off the front pages, it's no longer in the news. But for the community that's impacted, it takes months, years to recover, and that there are needs. And so sometimes you need those initial people who are going to rush in and be on the ground within 24 hours. I mean, and the people who have those gifts and those skills, and particularly the professional organizations, have the capacity to come in and get to work quickly. But just because it might take you some time doesn't mean that you're not going to be useful. So if you're not able to drop everything instantly and rush down to help out at at a place for in the first 24, 48, 72 hours, they might actually really need people 3 weeks later, right? When the attention starts going away, or 3 months later, when, things start packing away. And so I think being in touch with the local community, the emergency responders, the disaster teams that are on the ground is really vital, because otherwise, it's sort of like you can just forget.
Yeah. And I think that was one of the really well organized communications from the folks on the ground there, is that about a month ago I got an email that again thanked me for my assistance, but then said, we had a large influx of people that came during spring break, families that came down to help. We don't want you to forget us, because this is a need that will be ongoing for months and for years. I continue to follow each of the community groups, Dawson Springs, Mayfield, Princeton, and you see things like, does anybody know a plumber? Does anybody know a roofer? Does anybody know who can come with a trailer and pick up the tree that's still laying in the yard?
Right.
And I shared that plea again here in Versailles. I shared the exact email and said, maybe if you have a few days and can get down into that area, contact these folks, find out where they can put you to use. Farmers need fencing. It's I think for some of us, we don't realize that when there's nothing left,
right,
that you're basically building the foundations. And a lot of people, that's part of their problem. They can't get their temporary housing moved onto their property lot because the lot needs to be cleared of all of its debris.
Yeah.
And so that's what they're not looking for skilled labor. They're looking for somebody who can pick up limbs,
right,
and load them on a truck so they can get them out of the way.
Yeah. And so then a lot of the recovery is just that kind of...
It's basically grunt work.
The grunt work, right? The grunt work. So do you know if grunt work's still needed in Western Kentucky?
As of that email, yes. Grunt work is still needed, as well as skilled electricians, skilled plumbers, skilled roofers.
So if you are watching this and you are interested in going down and helping,
and please feel free to contact me. I will put you directly in contact with the folks in Mayfield, so that they can give you a list of wants, needs, and that your efforts are utilized to the fullest extent.
I think just kind of wrapping up now, because I know you got to get to choir. So many hats this morning. Forgot to say Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day to everyone.
But I think about, so you've got a lot of gifts, you've got a lot of skills. You know what life is like on the farm, and all farmers come with just a bountiful amount of know-how, right? And you also had a generator and a rig and all of that, so you had those kind of institutional pieces, and so you were connecting what you had with what the world needs, which I think is that's just our vocation as Christians, right? Where do our gifts meet the world's needs? That's where God blesses us and makes us the most alive and the most useful for the building up of the kingdom. Is this something that you think that you could see yourself doing again?
I do. And it's funny how things find me, but weeks after I got back from Mayfield, I was contacted by Michael Jonathan of Woodsong's Old Time Radio Hour, who had been collecting musical instruments to distribute to the families in that area. And he said, I have 1,000 musical instruments, and I have no idea how to get them to people.
There you go.
I said, I've got an idea. And so I created a digital format. I shared it to 1 million community groups who then again shared it.
Right.
And we watched as it went from about 50 people requesting instruments to 400 people requesting instruments, plus people who just met them at the various locations. And many families who had lost instruments that had been prized possessions for many years, all of a sudden were able to find yet another small piece of normalcy in their lives and return to those activities that brought them joy.
And connecting your great gifts and passions.
Somehow or another, I'm in the right place.
You're in the right. This is how God uses us. Well, thank you, Sharon, for coming on. Thank you for your good and faithful ministry and for your work in this disaster recovery, and literally just walking us through the good steps. Think about what you have, how you can help, be on contact, figure out how to leave a small footprint. Don't be a disaster tourist. If you can do nothing else, send some money, and make sure that everything else that you do collect and gather and send is that there's a plan for distribution and that it's actually needed in the community. So, all right. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We're kind of awkwardly cutting the stream now. Gotta figure out a way to do this a little bit.